A village in the mountains has been suffering constant attacks from an S-rank Fenrir, so they spent all of their savings to hire an SS-rank party to defeat it. The members of Flaming Dragon Fang are some of the strongest adventurers in the world, each with their own unique strengths. But then there's Kurt, and all he's good for is doing chores, so he's hiding behind a wall to avoid getting hurt. However, Kurt is the first person the Fenrir attacks once it arrives, and he is sent flying. The other members of the party get ready for combat. Galnova orders Bandana to restrain the Fenrir, so she pulls out her wire and ties it up. But a second later, the Fenrir breaks her back against the wall. Normally, Bandana would be confined to a wheelchair for the rest of her life, but with Malphus on the team, she's healed within seconds and gets back to work. She uses a tree to anchor herself to the ground, giving Galnova an opening to aim for the Fenrir's head. He jumps up and sets it ablaze with his magic sword. The villagers are so happy about the Fenrir's defeat that they prepare a feast for the party, even though the village is almost broke. But Galnova absolutely hates this peasant food. He orders Kurt to prepare a decent meal for him instead, and Bandana asks him to make something special because today is the last day they are going to get to eat Kurt's cooking. Kurt doesn't understand what they mean by that, so he asks Galnova for an explanation, and he tells Kurt that, as of today, he is being fired. Kurt doesn't understand why they are firing him, so he asks Galnova if he did something wrong, but Galnova says the problem is that Kurt isn't doing enough. Sure, he handles the party's chores for them, but aside from that, he is completely useless in combat, and parties are only allowed to have 4 members. So if they want their party to become stronger, they need to replace Kurt with a powerful mage or at least someone who can handle themselves in a fight. Kurt pleads with them to let him stay in the party, but Galnova kicks him in the stomach because he is sick of listening to Kurt's whining. They don't need him anymore, and that's final. The next day, Kurt leaves the village on his own, with nowhere to go and a wallet emptier than the abyss. Kurt eventually arrives in the city of Samila, and he is down to his last few pennies, so he really needs to find a new job soon. He finds a temp work agency and decides to give it a shot. He walks in and is greeted by the receptionist. She asks him if he is here to hire someone or to look for a job, and after Kurt tells her he's here looking for work, she informs him that she will need to conduct an interview and aptitude test. First, she asks for basic details like his name, age, and hometown. So, he tells her his name is Kurt Rockhans, he's 15 years old, and he is from Hass village in the Sheen Mountains. Kirschel had no idea that there was a village up in those mountains, but moving on, she asks him what his work history was like. Kurt tells her that he was a part of Flaming Dragon Fang, but all he ever did for them was basic chores, and he was recently fired. Kirschel is surprised to hear that Kurt was part of the S-rank party, and even if he didn't do much for them, having the party's name on his application will definitely help him find a new job. Kurt is glad to hear that, and now all he needs to do is complete the aptitude test so Kirschel can figure out what his strengths and weaknesses are. Aptitudes in this world are gifts granted by God, and if Kurt is lucky, he might discover a hidden talent today. Aptitudes are graded from G rank all the way up to SSS rank, and the difference between aptitude ranks is so great that someone with a G rank sword skill would barely be able to swing a sword, while someone with an A rank sword skill could effortlessly split a rock in half. Kurt is excited to find out if he has a talent, but unfortunately, every single combat aptitude on his sheet is rated G rank, so he has no hope of ever taking on a combat role. Kurt immediately loses all hope, but Kirschel tells him there's still a chance that he might have a good trade skill, like alchemy or blacksmithing. Although, the technician who handles those aptitude tests is currently on vacation, so Kurt will have to come back next week to be evaluated. Kurt tells her he won't last that long because he's one loaf of bread away from being penniless, so he really needs to find a job today. Kirschel understands Kurt's situation, so she asks him to try lifting one of those sandbags over there. Kurt gives it a shot, and as he puts his hands on the bag, he gets a strange sensation, almost like the sand drained a bit of his mana. Anyway, he lifts the bag, and since he is strong enough to do that, Kirschel thinks he should be able to handle construction work. She tells him that the Margraviate of Tycone is currently recruiting workers to help repair the city walls, so Kurt should be able to get a job there if she writes a letter of recommendation for him. Kurt is grateful for her help, so he immediately heads out to meet the Margrave. The Margrave sees the letter saying that Kurt wants to work here, but he honestly doesn't think Kurt looks like he can handle construction work. But then again, he needs all the hands he can get, so he decides to give Kurt a chance. He tells him to mix up some cement and use it to repair the wall, and his pay will be determined by how much work he puts in. The Margrave will be back to check on Kurt's progress later, and he tells him that he had better get to work soon because if he hasn't used at least half a barrel of cement by the time the Margrave is back, his pay is going to be low. Kurt wants to ask a question because the Margrave never mentioned anything about pouring mana into the cement to strengthen it, but he decides to stay quiet because it's probably common knowledge. Still, he's surprised that the quota is only half a barrel of cement because that seems way too easy. So, Kurt decides to use as much cement as he can before the Margrave returns. By the time the Margrave is back, he is shocked to see that Kurt has already finished an entire section of the wall. Kurt apologizes to him because he could have done more, but he ran out of cement halfway through. The Margrave is still having a hard time believing that Kurt really repaired over a third of the huge western wall, so he asks Kurt how he managed to repair the top of the wall. Kurt explains that he just threw the cement up there and used a stick to smooth it out. Normally, the Margrave would call Kurt a liar because that sounds impossible, but Kurt clearly managed to make it work, so he has to be telling the truth. He asks Kurt how long he plans to work here, and Kurt says he just needs the job for a week. The Margrave is glad to hear that. He tells Kurt that he has done enough work for today, so he can go home now. He doesn't have enough money on him to pay Kurt for all the work he did, so he hands him a small pouch of money and promises to send him the rest through the temp agency. Kurt is amazed because even the small pouch has more money in it than he ever could have made when he was working for the hero party. Over the next few days, Kurt continues to work hard on repairing the wall, but all of a sudden, the Margrave tells him he is being fired. Kurt asks why, so the Margrave explains that the wall repairs were supposed to provide work for people in poverty, but Kurt is way too efficient. So if he keeps working here, there will be no work left for anyone else. He isn't mad at Kurt or anything, but from what he has seen, Kurt's ability is at least SS rank, if not SSS rank, so he would be better off working in the royal capital or something. He gives Kurt a lump sum payment as compensation for being fired so suddenly and walks off, but Kurt completely misunderstands the situation and thinks the Margrave just wanted to get rid of him for being a terrible worker. He heads back to the temp agency and meets with Kirschel to tell her he got fired and it's still going to take a few days before Kurt can have his trade attributes appraised. Just then, they hear a commotion over at the front desk, and it looks like a girl is trying to set up a recruitment ad, but the receptionist at the desk tells her that no one would agree to work under such terrible conditions with what she's offering. Even so, the girl keeps insisting that the receptionist should try to find someone, and she's starting to cause a disturbance, so Kirschel goes over to see what the problem is. Kirschel's coworker tells her that this girl wants to recruit a miner to excavate a mountain that hasn't been explored, but she is refusing to offer an upfront payment and insists on paying only if the excavation is successful. Kirschel agrees that no one in their right mind would ever agree to those terms, so she tries to convince the girl to hire investors to develop the mine. But the girl says she can't do that because if she doesn't pay the taxes by the end of the week, they'll impound her mine. Just then, Kurt walks up and says he is crazy enough to take a job like that. After all, back in his village he used to help with the mine excavation, so he has a decent amount of experience. Kirschel asks Kurt if he is sure he wants to accept, because with the contract the girl is offering, it is entirely possible that he won't get paid at all. Before Kurt can respond, the girl cuts him off and says she was actually hoping to hire a brownie dwarf, not a helpless-looking boy, so she would feel bad making Kurt do it. However, any dwarf would require an upfront payment of at least 10 silver, and the girl doesn't have that much money to spare, so she decides to take Kurt after all. As Kurt and the girl leave, Kirschel feels bad for letting him take that job because it probably isn't worth the time. Honestly, she thinks Kurt would be better off working in a brothel because she would pay a lot of money to spend the night with him. While she's daydreaming about Kurt, her coworker gets her attention and tells her that a bank transfer just came through. Apparently, it's the remaining money the Margrave promised to send to compensate for all the work Kurt did on the wall. Kirschel was expecting it to be something like 50 silver, but it's actually a check for 200 gold, and that's a lot of money. She is so shocked Kurt was actually able to make that much money that she accidentally stumbles over the sandbags on the floor. Her coworker comes over and tells her to be careful with those because they aren't regular sandbags. They are actually used to measure the amount of mana a person possesses, and they are supposed to get heavier when someone with a large mana reserve touches them. They usually don't react with regular people, so Kirschel is able to pick it up fairly easily, but she remembers seeing Kurt struggle a lot when he picked it up a few days ago, so she's starting to wonder if he really is just a normal kid. Meanwhile, Kurt and Ulysses are walking into the forest to get to her campsite, but when they get there, Kurt is a little concerned because there's only one tent. Ulysses says the tent is big enough for the two of them to sleep together, but Kurt says he'd never be able to go to sleep if he's lying next to a cute girl like her. After hearing Kurt call her cute, Ulysses gets upset because she thinks he's just trying to flatter her, but Kurt says he really does think that Ulysses is cute. Ulysses realizes Kurt genuinely meant it, so she lets go and hands him a potato for dinner. It's just a basic boiled potato, but it has been so long since anyone has cooked for Kurt, so he really appreciates it. He is also grateful for the fact that Ulysses is sitting with him to eat because Galnova and the others from the hero party always refuse to let Kurt eat in the same room as them. Later that night, Kurt and Ulysses go to bed, but Kurt is having a hard time sleeping because Ulysses went to bed in her underwear. He will never be able to go to sleep with stiff wood, so he decides to leave the tent for the night and sleep outside. Once Kurt leaves the tent, Ulysses opens her eyes because she was just pretending to fall asleep. She intentionally went to bed in her underwear to see if Kurt was the kind of person to assault her in her sleep, but now, she knows he's a good guy. The next morning, Ulysses wakes up and leaves the tent. She finds Kurt sleeping over by a tree, and she feels a little bad about making him sleep out here, but then she notices that her jacket is fixed. Kurt soon wakes up, so she asks him if he's the one who repaired her jacket, and he confirms it. She's impressed that he has so much talent for sewing, and she's starting to wonder if he is really going to be good at mining, but it's too late to find someone else, so they'd better get to work. Kurt asks Ulysses if she has decided on a location to begin mining yet, but she was just going to dig in random locations and pray to find some valuable ores. Kurt tells her she'll never find anything if she searches like that, and he happens to know a much more efficient way. He takes Ulysses to a section of the mountain, and after looking around for a bit, he finds a rock full of gemstones. Ulysses is shocked that he found it so easily, but in a matter of minutes, Kurt has located every single gemstone in this section of the mountain. Ulysses can hardly believe it because if she sells all of these gems, she'll be able to pay off her debt, but Kurt tells her she can't sell them. Ulysses realizes he's right, since Kurt was the one who found all of them, so he gets to keep the money. That's not what he meant. He was just trying to tell her that the gems will be more valuable if he turns them into magic crystals first. Kurt was right about that, but Ulysses says there are only 10 mages in the entire kingdom who are skilled enough to turn gems into magic crystals. But while she was saying all that, Kurt just finished turning a gem into a magic crystal. Ulysses is too stunned to speak because not only did Kurt create a magic crystal, but he did it instantly, when even the most experienced mages spend at least an hour to make a single magic crystal. After Kurt finishes turning all the gems into crystals, he agrees to let Ulysses go sell them, so she heads out while he stays behind on the mountain because he has a few things he wants to finish doing first. Ulysses heads to the city's customs agency and tells them that she wants to sell some magic crystals in the royal capital, but magic crystals are incredibly valuable, so the agent asks her where she got these. There's no way he would believe her if she told him that some random boy created them, so she flashes her royal family emblem to get him to stop asking questions. This is kind of a bluff since she stopped working for the royal family a while ago and they just forgot to take her emblem away, but it does the trick, so the customs agent allows her to use the teleportation circle to go to the capital. Once she's there, she heads to the shop of an old friend, and she tells Mimiko that she has some magic gems to sell. Mimiko takes a look at them, and at first, they don't seem like they'd be worth much, but upon closer inspection, she discovers that they have 10 times the normal amount of mana imbued in them, so these crystals are worth 10 gold each. Ulysses is at a loss for words because Kurt gave her 50 of these, so Mimiko casually hands her a bag of 500 gold coins. But before Ulysses leaves, Mimiko has 2 requests to make. First, she wants Ulysses to promise to only sell crystals like these at this shop because it would be a disaster if crystals that are this powerful were allowed to circulate without regulation, and secondly, she wants to know the name of the person who created the crystals. Ulysses agrees to the first condition, but she says she can't tell Mimiko the name of the crystal's creator because she'd have to ask him for permission first. Mimiko is a court mage for the royal family, so she tries using her position to order Ulysses to give up the mysterious mage's information, but Ulysses doesn't work for the royal family anymore, so she isn't obligated to obey Mimiko. Mimiko realizes she isn't going to be able to convince Ulysses to give up Kurt's information, so at least asks her to make sure he doesn't wander off to another nation. She also wants Ulysses to tell him that if he agrees to come work for the royal family, Mimiko is prepared to grant him the title of Count and full access to the Royal Research Lab and all its benefits. Ulysses then leaves Mimiko's shop, and the next morning, she returns to the mountain to meet up with Kurt, but she is shocked to find that Kurt built a whole house in the time she was gone.